Welcome back to another episode of Divorce at Altitude. This is Ryan Kalamaya. As listeners know, we have had various experts on, and we've asked them about Eric Wolf. And Eric is, as listeners know, is our hypothetical divorce client. This week, we get to hear from effectively Eric Wolf when he's on the other side. We are joined by Andy Heller. He has written a book, Take the High Road, Divorce with Compassion for Yourself and Your Family. It is excellent. I highly recommend it. My firm will be giving a copy of this book to our clients, and we'll hear from Andy about various aspects relating to his divorce and the divorce process in his book. So let me tell you a little bit about Andy. He teaches real estate investing to new and seasoned investors around the country. He runs a successful international freight forwarding company. He was born in Canada, and then he immigrated to the United States as a child. He graduated from the University of Florida with a Bachelor of Science, double majoring in finance and marketing. He has already co-authored 2 real estate investing books, and he stated that he had no intention of writing another. After his own divorce, he saw a crucial hole in the self-help space for men and women navigating through divorce. His book is what he calls a give back effort to make the process easier for those who are considering or who are on the divorce path. Andy, welcome to the show.
Ryan, I'm excited about it, and thank you for having me as a guest today.
And before we kind of get into the book and the various takeaways, so we were talking before recording. So you are in California.
I am.
And tell us about why you wrote the book and what's different than some of the other books that may exist out there in the self-help and divorce landscape.
Sure, I'll try and give you my story in 2 or 3 minutes to leave more time for questions here, Ryan. So, my ex-wife and I were sitting in front of our co-parent counselor. We had a lot of other things happen that made our divorce probably a bit more challenging. And she said, both of you can benefit from a therapist. I thought, what the heck? Why not? I always considered myself to be a reasonable and compromise-oriented businessman. I've run successful businesses, Ryan, but I was dealing with a lot. I had a new business at that time. My marriage was ending. And I said, this can't hurt. So I asked specifically for a therapist who had dealt successfully with divorced men. And I met this lady, and she was amazing. And what led me to think about writing this book, so whenever I'm stressed, I write notes. So I've already been writing notes for a year and a half. So I start to go in to see her, and I cannot count how many times I would go into her office. Something would happen involving my children or my ex-wife. I said, this is what happened, but don't worry, I thought it through. I got a reasonable solution. I would tell her what I planned to do. And she would listen to me. She was very polite. She'd say, thank you, Andy. Very reasonable, but you're not going to do that. You're going to do the opposite. And I would sit there and listen on how the solution came out of her mouth, which is so opposite to what I intended to do. But up until 5 minutes earlier, Ryan, what I planned to do seemed so sensible. And I'm like, oh my God. I was so impressed by how many times my instincts were off. That's the first point. The second is that, so when I'm stressed, I also don't sleep a lot. And I run my own business, so I have a lot more autonomy and flexibility than a lot of people. So things would happen, and she would say, Andy, I got a book for you. She'd go to her bookshelf, and she'd hand me a book. Andy, I got a book for you. She'd go to her bookshelf and hand me another book. And I read these books, and frankly, they were all good. And I'm a big believer, Ryan, that, if you can get 1 or 2 good tips out of a 2 or 3 hour read, it's worth the $20 for sure. So at this point now, about a year later, I had benefited from her guidance. I'd read countless books. I'm like, there's a gap in the self-help space for divorce. I did a little research, and not a lot of people are going to have as much time as I did, or they're going to sleep more than I did. So they need a best practices, one-stop shop for getting through a divorce. The other thing I saw, there's a lot of great books out there written by attorneys and therapists and co-parent counselors, and there needed to be a book written very objectively by somebody who's not a professional in the divorce space about how to get through the process. So I started to interview dozens of attorneys, co-parent counselors, parenting coaches, people who ran divorce support groups, therapists, family therapists, children therapists. So what you're reading in this book is the best practices of how to get through a divorce process. My role is really a businessman who takes the counsel of these experts and organizes it. And I'm very objective because I'm not an attorney. I'm not a co-parent counselor. I'm not a therapist. And the last point I'll say is that I realized through my own divorce that divorce is an experiential journey. So during this journey, you're going to do some things right, some things horribly wrong, and some things that you could have done a lot better. And the problem is you need that counsel on day one, not day 250 or 300 or 500, so that you and your ex and your children can all land in a healthier place. So the theme of my book is 46 tips and strategies of issues and events and things that will typically happen to most divorcees. We give them these strategies on the first day with the goal of landing in a healthy place much easier and faster, because when these situations arise in your own divorce, you've already been counseled about how to handle them effectively. And there's a lot of reviews that I've got that are really complimentary, but one of the most powerful reviews is from another author. She ended up writing my foreword. She said, "My book is the roadmap that every divorcee needs to get through the divorce and land in a good place." So that's my story, why I did this. And look, I'm a successful businessman, Ryan. I run businesses. This is not my job. I want this book to be successful because I want to try to help a lot of people land in a better place and manage the process easier. This is sort of my give back. It's something I'm passionate about. I think it can help a lot of people, and it's why I'm here today as your guest.
Yeah, I think that it would help for listeners to hear a little bit from that forward that you referenced, and it was by Julie A. Ross. She had written a book, Joint Custody with a Jerk, Raising a Child with an Uncooperative Ex. And so she wrote, what I didn't do, this is Julie speaking, and where Andy Heller's book comes in, is provide a pragmatic guide of the divorce process itself. If we think of divorce as the destination, Take the High Road becomes the roadmap that will get a couple there. And I think that it's important for listeners to understand you cover things that I have never seen in a book before that I think really be helpful for people going through divorce, or even on the other side where they're similar to you. They are tidbits. So for example, you have used kind of various examples. So like Eric Wolf, as listeners know, we use Eric Wolf. And so you'll have a vignette of Eric Wolf going through a divorce. And then one of the kids comes and says, "Mommy says that you had an affair." And then you run through how Eric could respond if he's emotional and why that's not good, and then maybe a potential and ideal response. And it's an example of a lesson, one of your 46 lessons. And I found that to be really effective. So can you maybe speak a little bit more about some of the other tips that you have, that if Eric Wolf were kind of walking through some of the tips, what would Eric what stories would you tell about Eric, or tips that would you have for Eric?
Sure. Let's talk about. So I know that a lot of the audience are also attorneys like yourself, Ryan. So I'll talk about a tip before you get your divorce signed and one after. So one of the tips and before is that it's an attorney's job. A divorce attorney's job can be very, very challenging. And one of the things I talk about in my book is that it's more your responsibility as a divorcee to help your attorney, as opposed you got to guide him or her with what's important to you. And in the defense of all divorcees, sometimes our lives are just blowing up, and the ability to be focused is not an easy thing. So an action item we speak about in the divorce before you get your MSA signed is to write down two or three things to force yourself to write down two or three things and identify the two or three things that are most important to you. You arm your attorney with this information and you say to him or her, compromise everywhere else. These are the two things that are important to me, and I'm empowering you to compromise everywhere else. Another businessman's tip I give in the book is sometimes, in a collapse in marriage, a collapse in a relationship, Ryan, the communication has ended. So you don't really know what you need to do to get the deal done and get that divorce signed. So one of the business principles that I bring into the negotiation tips is all right, if you and your attorney are unsure what they're thinking on the other side, make two offers. Okay, here's one offer, maybe one offer that is a bit more inclined towards finances. Another offer, as an example only, is a bit more inclined toward custodial time. Flip these, and you tell the attorney, accept one or the other. Even if they don't accept one or the other, Ryan, the way they respond will help and arm the attorney with some sense of what needs to happen to get the deal done. These are the types of tips that will save you tens of thousands of dollars. On the communication end, I'm actually just going to kind of expand on the story you touched on. There's a lot of emotion percolating, and when you hear your children, particularly with younger children who don't really have the filter, talking about what's happening in your ex's household, it's not an easy thing to manage. So you are right. In one or two chapters, I go through actually how to respond to your children, what to say, what not to say. One of the other suggestions in one of those chapters is it might be helpful to write down or even to say to yourself what you really want to say. You tell your mom, you tell your father this. But then you come back and you give the answer, the nice vanilla answer that you need to answer. Now, I'm going to say something. My book touches on a lot of areas that I feel is groundbreaking. It's not communicated. One of in other books, I'm not the first author who said, don't criticize your former spouse. Okay? That's nothing new. But when I was researching this book, Ryan, I learned something from one of the interviews of therapists that really took that piece of advice and just exponentially made it more important. She said to me, Andy, your children of divorcees, whether they are 5 years old or 15, they understand one thing very clearly, that they are the DNA product of two individuals, a biological mom and a biological father. Okay? And they are the environmental product of those two individuals. Now, it could be a mom and a dad, but you're the biological creation of two people. When you criticize your spouse, you're effectively impacting your child's own self-esteem. That's something that I had never read anywhere, Ryan, and I found that was so powerful. So you may feel that you need or you want to say, well, your mom should know this or your dad should know that. But you got to remind yourself as a divorcee that child is half of the person you're about to criticize. And you can't do it. You just can't do it. And sometimes the answer just needs to be, I just really can't go there right now, Johnny or Susie. I'm going to choose to change the subject.
Yeah, that reminds me of Abraham Lincoln. He was very well known for, writing long letters that were, emotional and just basically blasting his opponent or whoever he was writing for, and then he would let it sit on his desk and then throw it away the next day. And I've referenced that before. And you get into Bill Eddy's BIF communication protocol. We've had some discussion on that, but your tips kind of go across and really run the gamut to how you should approach restraining orders versus special masters or co-parenting coordinators versus hey guys, get like a cookbook and figure out how to cook and what your life is going to look like. So I've been really impressed with the range because it's not just communication and touchy feely therapy type stuff that, some guys in particular, Eric Wolf might say, that's just a little bit woo woo for me. But, you really get into tactical, practical advice. But Andy, I'm curious, what are some of the most common mistakes people make when negotiating their divorce from your perspective?
Well, I touched on it earlier. I think the most number one mistake, Ryan, is a lack of focus. Okay, and that's why it's imperative to write down a couple of things and that are important to you and compromise everywhere. Number two, and this is where a good attorney can be helpful, is it's on some level it's almost impossible to completely shield yourself from emotion affecting your decisions. Okay, and again, this is the partnership between a good attorney and and the divorcee, and maybe even the involvement of a therapist can help you manage that, as well as writing down your goals. Okay, um, the other thing I would say is, uh, and I say this throughout the book, a divorce, everybody, is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And people tend to focus so much on what do I get when the document is signed. And I cannot emphasize how that is very flawed thinking. It's really where you want to land as a father, as a mother, 2 or 3 years later. Okay, and I'll give you a great example of that. We talk actually. This is a case study in the book. Okay, it's a father who does a lot of business travel. Okay, an involved father. Okay, and his marriage ends, and he wants 50% custody. He was an involved dad. All right, he probably deserved 50% custody, Ryan. But he took a step back and recognized the fact, these kids are already used to being alone with mom, but they're not used to being alone with dad. And I'm not used to parenting on my own. I've got a good parenting partner, but we're not meant to be together as a couple. So rather than asking for 50% custody out of the gate, this divorcee met with a co-parent counselor who had interest in the children being paramount, and the co-parent counselor was communicating with the children's play therapist. So the plan was set forth, Ryan, where over the first 18 months, gradually, his his custodial time would increase, and it was done in ranges. It was actually brilliant the way they did this, and I speak about this in the book. So, for example, he would start off with 30% custody, somewhere between 3 months, but no longer than 9 months, assuming they got a green light from the children's therapist. That would increase to 40. Somewhere between 9 months, no later than 18 months, that would increase to 50. There's actually 3 stages. The bottom line is that he got to his 50% custody much sooner, okay? And he did so in a manner that had the best interest of his children was paramount, and it was actually good for him because it gave him a chance he had to make some adjustments to his business travel so he could accommodate and handle that kind of custody. So people get a little bit too anxious for what they get out of the gate, and they lose sight of what's in the best interest of the children. And I would also say it's not just about what your best interest in the children's. You've got to consider your former partner. And the more amicable your relationship can be with your former partner, even if that level of cooperation takes a couple years to land, the better it's going to be for your children, and the better it's going to be for your own stress.
Your recommendation on using kind of parenting coaches or co-parent coordinators is consistent, at least in my practice. It's something I've been doing a lot more fairly recently, is having parents go and work directly with a co-parenting coach. And I think that guys in particular, they just want to jump and immediately get to that 50-50. But it kind of goes to something in your book, is that it's a process where you have these traditional roles, and those roles are changing. There's going to be a change from the traditional model of the mom staying at home and the guy who's out business traveling and making, primarily the breadwinner. And when you just all of a sudden jump in and equal parenting time, it can really cause some waves. And I think guys in particular, you said, at the very beginning, you would have these ideas of what you were going to do. And correct me if I'm wrong, Andy, it would be like you telling your ex-wife the ideal situation because you're so logical, and telling her what to do, what she should do with her money because you had it all figured out, which I see all the time. And so I think guys, when they, in particular, when they hear these co-parenting coaches give a game plan, it relieves a lot of anxiety because they know they're eventually going to get there. And I think it's better for everyone as they transition into their new roles. So I'm wondering if you could speak to maybe some of those things I identified as they relate, to your experience.
In terms of use of funds, I got a great story that came from an interview with a therapist where she spoke of a divorced man who had agreed to a higher level of support that because he felt it was the right thing to do, and that was all good. But then he watched some decisions that the ex-wife was making on the use of funds, the new car, the house that might have been too big. And he came in and he just started ranting and raving to the therapist. And so the therapist's response was, she stopped him. Let's say his name is Paul. Paul, are your children living in a good home? Yes, they are, but. Paul, are your children living in a good home? Yes, but you don't understand. Paul, I do understand. Are your children living in a safe and good home? Yes, they are. Paul, your job is to write the check and then forget about it. You have a right to speak up if there's anything about what your ex-wife is doing that puts that it wouldn't be safe or is not in your children's best interest. How she spends the money, as long as your children have a safe and comfortable environment, is no longer your something that you can impact. And this was a really powerful discussion because it took her basically 3 or 4 times, Ryan, answering the same darn question before he realized, I get it. My role has changed to write the check, and I'm no longer a guidance in her ear. That's not my job anymore. Okay, we live separate households, and she's going to make some decisions I'm not going to agree with, and I just need to accept that. So the words I'll use on that, Ryan, is it's a recalibration for many. You know, is he cooking a healthy meal for the children? Is he, now, if the kids come home and every day they talk about mac and cheese for dinner, it's probably something that should be brought up because you got an obligation to learn how to cook and feed your children healthy meals. But again, you've got to recognize that there's a box around what you can address and what you can't address, and it's simply not the same as when you're married. And if you have trouble identifying what's in that box, what's outside the box, that's where having a professional like a therapist who's not emotionally attached to your drama to help guide you until you can figure it out on your own. Okay? And that's one of the things we try to do with the book. In terms of a co-parent counselor, there's few things I recommend in the book that I feel more powerful and committed to than the use of a co-parent counselor. Again, as you're going through divorce, even in an amicable divorce, we are not at our emotional best as divorcees. We're not operating at peak efficiency. So having somebody in the room to help guide you to make decisions while you're not able to communicate effectively with your ex there's no downside. A co-parent counselor can be as frequent or infrequent as you like. A typical relationship might look like this, Ryan. So the divorcees say, look, we're not getting along, but we still got these kids, and we got to manage their lives and make some decisions, but it seems like we're not able to get along with everything. So there's 2 things I'd recommend. One, use of a special master. A special master is a binding tiebreaker that keeps you out of court. Okay? And the beauty about a special master, once you establish it, it could be something where you never use or you use once in 5 years. Okay? The co-parent counselor tend to be non-binding. Okay? And the benefit of the co-parent counselor, I would say, it helps to frame your thoughts in a manner where your spouse or soon to be or ex-spouse can hear you when you're really not able to hear one another directly. So you come into the co-parent counselor, let's say you're meeting once a month. Your former spouse has his or her list, you got your list, and she takes a 2-hour session and tries to go through as many of these items and come up with compromise or agreements that can allow you guys to parent effectively. Okay, a year later, you know what? You're not fighting about as many things. You change that from once a month to once every 2 months. 2 years later, you're once every quarter. 3 years later, you don't need any more. That's an ideal progression. And as you implement other tools to where you can communicate better, as the anger and angst lessens over time, which typically does happen, you don't need to have such involvement from third parties because you're able to get things accomplished on your own. But I'm an absolute believer in this, Ryan. And look, the other thing about it, and as an attorney will understand this very well, if things do go south and you can't get things accomplished, you're also creating a witness. And God forbid if you guys do end up in court and you've been the more reasonable one, involving a third party to watch the process will only benefit you if you guys end up in court, which is, again, not where you want to end up.
Yeah, and you go through litigation, a litigated divorce, a mediated divorce, the kitchen table approach to divorce. So that's one of the things that you touch on. But I want to maybe comment a little bit on the recommendations you have. So in Colorado, we do have special masters. We're going to be having an upcoming episode on that. It just came up in a case I have with a private judge. But frequently these professionals will be mental health professionals, and there are several, in the Denver area. We're going to be having one of the guests, a guest episode on to talk maybe a little bit more specifically about those. But most of them will offer a range of services. So there will be individual, child, and family therapy. That's one grouping of service that a professional could offer. There is decision making or a parenting coordinator, which is what you were referencing, where it's non-binding, but then they can have a decision maker role. And we've had previous episodes on that issue. Erica Gebhardt and some of the others that we've had to talk about PCDMs as they're commonly known. But then you can also have an arbitrator in Colorado, which is really similar to a special master. So they can be called different things, but have the same powers. I think it's helpful for people to know some of them are binding, some of them are not. Some of them can be witnesses, some of them cannot. And so, really what, there's parenting consultation and parenting coaching. Those are two other different ranges of services, but they're kind of all blurred and globbed into this soft kind of having a neutral third party working directly with parents and potentially taking out and reducing attorneys. And I can tell you as a divorce attorney, if people come to an agreement for their children, it is more likely that they're going to be happy with their divorce, which is ultimately what divorce lawyers, or they should want, or at least what I want. And what you were talking about, Andy, really, people come to me, they never are psyched to call me because they're going through divorce. Like, no one's happy. No one says, Ryan, that was great. I really had a good time. Instead, no, and you laugh, but it's true. But in a couple years, they come back to me, and my goal is for them to say, listen, I was in a really bad spot. You saw me at my worst, and I could tell you things and do, like bounce ideas off of you, and I'm in a much better place. And that's really what your book is targeted to bring, that perspective that people are emotional. They have a saying that in criminal law, you see bad people at their best. And then in family law, you see good people at their worst. And there's an element of truth to that from my experience. I mean, my firm does both criminal defense and family law. And, there is an element of truth. And for you're kind of really touching on the emotional impact of decision making, and you've been through it, and you talk a lot about the value of therapy both for divorces as well as for children. So I'm curious, what, beyond the parenting coaching, what would you say to a listener like Eric Wolf about the value of therapy both for him and his children?
We'll start with him. And I guess we kind of touched on this earlier. You are incapable of recognizing the degree at which the emotions are affecting your decisions. And I was very fortunate that I was able to go to a therapist, and I recognized very quickly, Ryan, that I was not operating at peak capacity. And my therapist basically said, your situation is not unusual. And I consider myself a very much, the whole book that I wrote is very much a glass half full book. And that's how I'm wired. My dad was a perennial optimist, and fortunately I inherited that trait. But I was just not able, I didn't have the capabilities at that time without the outside help to make the decisions I needed to make. So so I'd say to Eric is that, looking at his story, he's clearly affected. So he could use some help. Getting to these people to recognize and look in the mirror saying, I need that help. That's something that's not always easy for everybody to do, unfortunately. For your children, there is no better gift than gifting your children the ability to have a child counselor. As I say in the book, you cannot both be the disruptor in their lives and the consoler. Yes, you can be a shoulder to lean on, but you got enough drama going on in your own life. There needs to be somebody dedicated to hearing the children that is not affected by your drama. And that eliminates you and your former spouse. So again, I'm not the first author to say therapy for children is a helpful thing. But there are some concepts and action items that I introduce that are not discussed in other books that I've read. In one of my most powerful interviews of a brilliant child play therapist, she said, Andy, it's not just about getting your kids in therapy. Of course, you also got to pick a good therapist. But I've recently adjusted my own practice to stress the timing of the start of that therapy. Now, what I'm about to describe, Ryan, is not always possible. She said this, but it's optimal. And that is getting the kids in therapy about 3 to 6 months before they learn the news of their parents splitting up. Why is that important, everybody? If you put your kids in therapists after you've already blown up their lives, you put the therapist in a position of damage control. She does not have a relationship with the children, so therefore she has to both build trust and get involved on calming down the drama and helping these children. Versus, okay, you and your ex say, look, it's not working out, or maybe we might go to divorce, we're just not getting along. All right, no matter what is happening, this is not a healthy household right now. Let's get our kids in therapy. So the therapist begins to build a foundation of trust. Let's say January 1. June 1, the parents say, we're done. It's time to have that difficult conversation with our children. They may already sense it, but it's time to let them know. They have the conversation, but from June 1 onwards, Ryan, the therapist can be far more impactful because she already knows the kids. She's already built a foundation of trust, so she can go right and immediately towards helping them get through the process versus getting to know them at the same time. The therapist's point is that if you can time the start of children's therapy so that a foundation of trust can be built before they learn the news of the household splitting up into two, you give the therapist the ability to be far more impactful to helping your children land in a healthy place and be able to manage the drama. You yourself, everybody, we divorcees, we're not capable of doing that. And again, Mr. Wolf, I'd say, okay, you may have a lot of confidence, you may have been very successful professionally, but your children need to have their own resource to help them land in a special place. And your best gift to them is to accept that and to get them with a resource like that before they learn the news.
Well, Andy, you've hit on several tips, and I know that you've got 12 golden nuggets to start your divorce journey, and people should check out the book. We're not asking you to give everyone every single tip, and like I said, they should pick up the book. But are there any of your favorite tips or golden nuggets that you haven't mentioned already that you can leave listeners with an insight into what they can find in taking the high road?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm going to go to one of the biggest complaints of divorcees, particularly the years after, and that is the inability to communicate. We've been talking a little bit about that, but I'm going to give a great tip, and this involves and again, one of the unique elements of my book is I'm a businessman, all right, and I'm taking this great counsel from experts like yourself, Ryan, from a legal perspective, and therapists and co-parent counselors, and I'm just organizing it in a best practices book. So I cannot tell you, by far the number one complaint during all my interviews with divorcees was around the inability to communicate. So this great story I'm going to share, and I talk about this in a chapter in the book, is this comes from a divorcee who was a Carnegie disciple. Okay, Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. They provide business people and also non-business people with best practices of how to deal with people and communicate and get through challenging situations. And so this divorcee was simply, the way he described it, if he said right, his ex said left. If he said up, his ex said down. And that was their situation. Okay, whatever came out of his mouth or his pen, the answer was no. So he recognized that. So one of the powerful business tools in communication, when you have an adversarial relationship with somebody and you've got to get things accomplished, they teach business people, don't allow your adversary to own every suggestion, and change how you communicate, and rather define the problem or the question and then ask for a solution. So an example might be, Ryan, I don't know what to do. Susan, I don't know what to do. Little Johnny is tired of ballet. He wants to go to basketball because his buddies are there. In a normal world, I'd say, okay, let's put him in basketball. That's the solution, all right? But she's going to say no, or he's going to say no. So instead, you change that. All you do is define the problem. Susan, I don't know what to do. We got a problem that Johnny does not want to do ballet. He's complaining in my home. I bet he's doing that in yours. What do you suggest? Okay, now the hope is that the answer can either be similar to what you want as a solution, or a step closer. If it's similar, great, take it. That's exactly what I'm so happy you said that. Great thought. I agree with you. Okay, and your former partner owns the solution, not you, even though she said or he said exactly what you were thinking. If the answer is not exactly what you want to hear, again, you have to change how you communicate. Well, I really appreciate that thought. I love this part. I still think we have a problem. Here's the problem. Again, not pushing your former spouse to the decision that you want. Just speaking in terms of identifying the problem. This does not work all the time, Ryan. I've got, I think, 2 or 3 chapters dedicated to communication. And we talk about the use of a business tool called the time card. We talk about when you choose to answer emails. You already talked about the style of answers. Okay, make your answers vanilla. Okay, there's also communication platforms other than email to be used.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's a host of suggestions and the whole BIF principle: brief, informative, factual, and sticking to the basics. But one of my favorite suggestions is not if you have an adversarial relationship, you've got to change the nature of your communications and stop communicating and identifying what your preference is and just keep asking questions. That, coupled with some of these other suggestions, will really help you communicate better. Now, I will say something. The end of that story is this man said, you wouldn't believe it, I could not get her to agree to what color shorts to buy for the children. I started using these tools. 3 years later, she's calling me asking, what do I suggest? Again, it's a marathon, everybody, not a sprint. These things are not going to improve day one, but day 30, after a quarter, after half a year, eventually these help bring down the toxic levels that are out there and allow for a relationship. You don't have to be friends. You don't really want to be friends, but you got to arrive at a point. The goal is to arrive at a point where you both can co-parent effectively so you're not screwing up your kids.
Well, and that's everyone's goal, and a lot of what you say resonates with me. I frequently will have conversations with my clients about how we can have the other party make it his or her idea of where we eventually want to get, because frequently in divorces it has to be one person's idea,
Yep.
and if it may be a great idea, but it has to be their idea, the other side's idea. And you provide some recommendations, and that's especially true in the post-divorce phase. But you as a business guy can appreciate that divorce is unique for someone like Eric Wolf, because they are locked into a negotiation and they have no choice. They can't just walk out. If they walk into Starbucks and the coffee is $5 and they just don't value that coffee $5, they can just walk out. You can't do that in a divorce. You are locked into a negotiation, and how you address that and deal with that is something that is a real key to your book, because that is a frustrating reality for many people in a divorce. They just don't understand that.
Yeah, and the one thing that was helpful for me is because I was a divorcee going through the process, um, I had a lot of empathy as well as personal experience, and I was able to look in the mirror. And I was very fortunate, Ryan, because I was able to identify things that I needed. Um, and not all people have that ability to have that kind of counsel, or they don't have that kind of time, which is where podcasts like yours come in, where books like mine come in. When you have a limited amount of time, use that time effectively to get you the guidance you need to get through the process. I will say again, this is my dad and the glass half full talking. It generally does get better, and when you're going through the worst of the worst, it's oftentimes going to feel like it can not get any. It's not going to improve. Generally, it does. Time is a wonderful healer. But again, your children, because the effect of those years when they're younger, they go so fast and they're so formative in terms of the types of adults they become. You've got to get to a place where you can manage their lives, manage communications with your ex effectively as fast as possible, not only for your own mental health, but for theirs.
So, Andy, for those that are listening, the Eric and Melanie Wolfs of the world, or a divorce attorney in Colorado, where can they find more about you and your book, Taking the High Road?
Well, my email is Andy at takethehighroad divorce.com. You can go to Amazon, get the book, or Barnes and Noble, Target, and you can reach me also through my publisher, and that's all on the book. Yeah, so I'm fairly easy to reach and find online through any of those means via email or by getting the book and reaching out.
Well, I appreciate the time and insight, Andy. And until next time, thanks for listening to Divorce at Altitude. If you found this episode to be helpful, tell a friend, and if you can, leave a review. It helps others find us. And take care out there. Thanks.
Thank you, Ryan.